everyone. My name is Karen Williams, the acting co-chair, I guess, of the Portland Utility Board, and we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Under Portland City Code and state law, the Portland Utility Board is holding this meeting electronically. Board members and relevant city staff are attending remotely, electronically, or by phone, and the city has made it available to the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. The public will have an opportunity to provide comments during the public comment portion of the agenda and can also provide written testimony to the board by emailing utilityboard@portlandoregon.gov. Pardon me, PUB believes and acts upon anti-racist principles. So in our meeting spaces and interactions within PUB, every person has the right to share their personal perspective, but we stand against wrongful conduct, particularly that conduct that's targeted toward people that are made vulnerable by systemic inequity. This means stepping up as a community when there is wrongful conduct and fostering a space of learning and growth. We act on these principles by being active and deliberate, by speaking up and speaking out. Each of us is empowered to maintain the culture of PUB, and we focus on the impacted individuals or populations, condemning conduct, but not people.
I'm Amy Archer Masters, and I'll quickly run through the meeting guidelines. State your name before you speak, and if appropriate, who you're addressing or if you're addressing the group. The chat box is only viewable by the PUB staff, myself and Jonna Lynn. Limit chats to technical and logistical issues, including signing up for public comment, asking for technical assistance, or reminding us if you've been waiting to speak and have not been called on. The raise hand function is primarily used by the board. We may lower your hand once you begin speaking just to maintain the flow of the conversation. During public comment periods, the public can also raise your hand and you'll be called on when appropriate. Videos may be turned on when speaking if desired. It is not required. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. If you're using a phone, you may need to press *6 to mute and unmute. Public comment is taken during the comment period early in the meeting. You can sign up through chat with myself or Jonna Lynn or raise your hand during the comment period. It's also available just prior to any formal board vote after a motion has been made and seconded by board members. The meeting is being recorded and AI Companion is being used to help with transcription and closed captioning. I'll pass it back to you, Karen, for the agenda.
All right. We are still short of quorum, but we will continue with the business that we can do, acting as a subcommittee in a public meeting. We'll start with public comment. We probably will be holding on a review of minutes until, oh, there's Lauren. Welcome, Lauren. If we get one more, we'll go ahead and review our minutes and accept them. And then the bulk of our meeting will be to get our thoughts down on thoughts we have so far on the elements of the Water Bureau and BES budgets that we have had presentations about and gotten information. So we'll start compiling our thoughts about how the budget is shaping up. We may have Deputy Administrator Diapol at the end of the meeting. That's a little bit in limbo. And if we do not, then we will have some announcements from Amy, and then we will adjourn. So let's go ahead and there is our 6. Hello, Mally. Wonderful. So we do have quorum. And we will start with if any PUB members have had interactions with city officials, city staff outside of PUB that should be disclosed at this time. Go ahead and raise your hand or just unmute if you have any disclosures to communicate. Okay, not seeing anyone who has any disclosures to report or any communications to disclose. I think that's the way to say it. So let us open the floor for comments from members of the public. You can raise your hand or unmute.
I unmuted,
You
Karen.
are one of our-
This is Jim.
Oh, hello, Jim.
Hi. No,
Yeah,
no
please.
no public comment at this time.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, welcome. Thanks for being here. And Amy and Jonalyn, I'm assuming we have not received any written public comments.
That's
No.
correct.
Okay. All right. Well, let us move on then to a quick review of our February 4th minutes. Thanks for turning those around so quickly. To Jonalyn, is there any anything that anyone noted that needs to be added, changed, corrected in the February 4th minutes? Give folks a couple seconds to scan those if you have not done so already. Not hearing any corrections or additions to the minutes, so minutes will stand as a record of our February 4th meeting. Thank you again, Jonalyn. All right, so shall we dive in? Quick overview of goals for the next 45 minutes or so. We don't have to have anything final by the end of this meeting, although we do have quorum, so we could take some actions if the board members decided to do that. But it seemed like after our last meeting, just dedicating some time to starting to compile our, as members, concerns, thoughts, and reflections, basically on what we have heard so far. Looks like we've got a couple of folks all ready to go. So why don't we go ahead and just dive in, and unless either Chris or Kyle, if you had a question, but feel free to, I guess, Chris, you want to go?
Yeah, I
first?
just had a quick announcement. Today will be my last pub meeting. I'm going to be resigning after this. I have been promoted to PBOT's accounting supervisor, so I will have to withdraw and resign as the union representative at the end of this month. So this will be my last pub meeting. I have alerted management as well as union management, and they will be appointing someone hopefully soon, because I know we have quorum issues, to get this going. That is,
Oh, Chris.
I didn't want you guys to be surprised, but I'm not
You
here.
will be, yeah, you will be so missed. Thank you so much for your service and leadership and guidance and contributions. Congratulations. That's awesome. Good for you. Yay. But yeah, we really miss you. Thanks for letting us know. Kyle.
Thank you. Kyle Chipman, voting member of PUB. I have an overarching question that is partly coming from a place of ignorance, but I think it informs how we proceed with even thinking about budget proposals and recommendations. In the transition of Dawn and Edward and the acting directors and the seeking in the pursuit of a single role to combine the two bureaus, does that mean that they still act as distinct entities? Is the entire org structure changing? Is the way that budget is considered for these entities shifting? Like, how, I just don't even have a sense of clarity on how this transition and the One Water initiative informs how we can even make a recommendation for next year.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that even like the right question to ask for those who are more informed?
I don't think there's I don't think there's such a thing as a right question. And thank you for kind of pausing us from just sort of diving in as if nothing major has happened. So I'm going to turn to Amy, if I may. I know, Amy, the intent was to have the end of this meeting, if Deputy DCA Diapol was available, to maybe start responding to some of those questions, Kyle. We certainly, we have Edward and Quisha here who may or may not be in a position to answer those questions. But yeah, Amy, how would you recommend we move forward with our budget discussion, given things are going to be changing pretty?
Can I actually, before handing the floor up to Amy, Kyle, can I make one more statement as well?
Sure.
I do want to just say for Edward, and even though Dawn's not present, even in my short time being on the board, your attendance, your preparation, your professionalism, and also just reading up on the nature of this, your careers, departures, and the transition. Just want to say it really has been a pleasure to be present with you and to receive your technical skill and acumen and forethought. And thank you for your service to the city. So I just want to say thank you very much, because I appreciate everything you've offered, you and Dawn both, and you've always shown up fully here. So thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. Thank you.
Yeah, I certainly echo that, Kyle. The directors and staff and all of the leadership teams that we've worked with at the bureaus have been fantastic with engaging with the pub and being responsive and present when they can be. So certainly have appreciated that over the years, and particularly recently during so much transition. So I actually do not have much information beyond what has been shared in the announcements or in the materials that went out to you from DCA Donna Powell just yesterday or earlier this week. And I don't want to put the bureau staff on the spot. They certainly are welcome to chime in if there is content that they know that is helpful. But I know that the DCA is out of town, actually at a One Water conference or some event in California, and she had hoped to try to find a window of time towards the end of our meeting. So if she can make it, she will make it towards the end of this meeting. If not, then she's committed to making the next meeting for her to be present, to be able to respond to questions and just talk a little bit about the next steps. So we do know that that there is this intent, that there's a lot of work between, that stated intent and the actual recruitment and hiring of a director, which pub has engaged in the past. So that's something that I would assume members may want to advocate for, similarly to how you have in the past, as far as being engaged in whatever way is meaningful in that process. So that's certainly something that you can seek and ask for clarification from the DCA when she is able to attend. With any transition, it does take time. And in the interim, you're still having, those two bureaus still have all of their work that they're doing on top of their leadership, also navigating these coming changes and where there might be integration of services within their bureaus. So I imagine that they're all just pretty immersed in a lot of that behind the scenes work that needs to happen. So I think we'll learn more as we hear from the DCA and try to identify what steps are meaningful for pub to engage. And obviously I think you've made it very clear since the beginning of One Water's announcement, an interest in engaging in that process early and in a meaningful way. And so I think that has been communicated, and we will continue to reinforce that with them directly as well. But I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. So we will certainly, as we learn about anything, we will share it with all of you. where we can use some of our meeting space, or if we need to identify some project leads to engage in any efforts, then certainly I think that's another potential area that had been moving forward with some of the natural resources work previously. But in the meantime, some decisions still have to be made in this current budget cycle. And so whatever is on the table is still something that Hub can, and I believe should, react to, because whether it's as two bureaus or as a combined future bureau, this budget cycle isn't resolving all of that. There's a lot of elements and specific concerns that have been raised just related to, the rates and the initial guidance and that work that's moving forward. And so I think it's still important for you to identify what your clearest priorities are for communication, whether it relates just to the immediate or relates to, whatever future version of the Bureau as it moves forward. So I think there will be more opportunity, but you don't want to miss the opportunity where council will be making decisions in the coming months related to the current budget. It may be complicated by some of this information and how quickly it's going to move forward, but all of that, I think, I don't have any more information about it yet at this point.
Okay, thanks, Amy. I'd like to move to Mally's question. Kyle, we can come back to you, or statement there, and we'll move on. Although Mally, you lowered your hand, so I'm not quite sure what that means.
My name is Mally. I'm
That's
a
okay.
member, and I'm ready to give my statement. There's been a lot of changes in the past few months, specifically the land use decision change for the Bull Run filtration facility, the increased costs associated with that, and now the deputy and now the leading, staff members of the agencies are changing. As somebody who works in the water realm, this is like a lot of red alarms for me, and someone who's also a member and a citizen of the city of Portland. My concern is, how are these changes going to be integrated in the budget cycle? We're in like a very specific and unique place where we have all these increased like CIP costs and this new water treatment plant costs, and there's also restriction given by city leadership where we cannot raise rates through residents. In my mind, that triggers layoffs are going to be happening, and that there's some things that are happening behind the scenes that are leading to cost saving purposes because there are large projects coming along. I'm concerned how the budget's going to be reflecting that. We need qualified staff to be running the treatment plant, especially a new treatment plant. Is there going to be any costs associated with this new land use decision that's going to be associated with the Land Use Board of Appeals rejecting the current permit? How is that going to be captured in the budget? Are there any contingency funds associated with that? What if it gets rejected again? There's a lot of things that are happening in the news and the press that we're seeing regarding our city's water system. And I just, as a citizen, I really hope that these are reflected in the budget and that staff is being retained, qualified staff is being retained to make sure that these treatment plants are working well. Because if the ramifications of not having robust work, employees that are able to meet the demand of the city is that we're not in compliance, or that drinking water is not as safe as it could be, or that there's more cost issues down the line. So I'm just concerned as a citizen. I'm hoping that we're creating a budget, creating a workforce that can continue providing some of the best drinking water, in the nation.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all that, Mally. Let's continue on that line of stating concerns and thoughts on the current budget, but I want to go back to Kyle and see, Kyle, if you had something kind of back on the previous topic, or if
Yeah. I do have,
yeah.
generally in preparing for today's meeting, I have similar concerns that Mally raised. Oh, Kyle Chipman, voting member for Pub. Similar concerns that Mally raised around the striking down of the conditional land use permit for the Bull Run filtration facility. And I guess a general question I again have is, in terms of publicly accessible documentation or reference, is the One Water report that was issued at the end of October last year, is that the clearest kind of vision that's available to assess the format of what's coming? And I was starting to pull out some details from that report just to understand what might be occurring, or should we really, to what the point that Amy made earlier, should we continue to just function as the bureaus currently stand in their current structure as we define how we can show up? Is the One Water report from October, should that be like a signal of what's to come? Recommendations made in that report?
This is Amy, if I can speak up briefly. Yes, I would certainly look to the One Water report as kind of part of the roadmap and recommendations that we're moving forward. So I imagine it will evolve. I know that their leadership and staff are actively engaging with other jurisdictions, both internally, continuing to move some of that work forward. So I expect, we may learn more about specifics and can seek more specifics, particularly about what that means for the first year, because there were some specific things in the initial plan about the first year, but the timing of the retirements and moving forward may shift some of that. And so I imagine that there is some work planning that's going on as far as what the next steps entail. In the meantime, I think my point to trying to focus on that the bureaus are still functioning and doing work is that current leadership and incoming leadership are still maintaining their core services to ensure that water is delivered, that the environmental work and regulatory work and treatment is still happening. And so they are focused on both the maintenance of all their core services, as well as, some of this planning. And so there's both efforts that are going forward. I see that the Water Bureau Director, Eddie, is on screen. So maybe if you are indicating a willingness to speak to some of the questions about filtration and the LUBA decision, maybe perhaps that is one of the more immediate things that I think, since we have you in the room, that even just the brief update that we've had internally might be helpful to share briefly with the full pub, so that they understand just kind of the timeline of the next steps, and then hopefully resuming that work in the future.
I would be glad to do that, assuming that's good with the chair. I see a nod.
Yeah,
Edward.
yeah, I was definitely going to ask if you were available and willing to provide a few updates on the LUBA decision. So thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Edward Campbell, Interim Director for the Water Bureau. We have, and I will follow up this meeting with connecting this group to some written documentation that will help support this as well. So I'm gonna go from memory and try to stay conservatively within what I can accurately depict. The LUBA decision was, so I want to start with just framing this as there were multiple challenges to the city's land use permits from Multnomah County. And on all of them except for one, LUBA ruled in the city's favor. So I just want to make sure people understand that the LUBA decision was not a overarching rejection of the city's land use application. It was a rejection of one very specific part of the process that related to the way that the Multnomah County hearings officer defined natural resources and then applied the city's permit application against that definition. And so that is the one and only area of remand work to be done again by the county that is going forward. And all of the other challenges that have been issued initially to LUBA are now considered resolved and are no longer available for challenge. So in the overall context of the city's efforts to get the land use process resolved, the LUBA decision is ironically a major step forward. So I just want to make sure there's that context understood, because I think a lot of the media reporting has just focused on the fact that during the remand, we cannot move forward actively on the project. And that is absolutely true. And we are in the process of winding down our work on the project and working closely with Multnomah County to do the minimum to maintain the site during this process of remand. Remand by the county is by statute limited to 120 days. So we expect the process to take around that time frame. It could be a little more or a little less. And the process will be, again, for the county to look at that one issue, the natural resources definition, to respond to LUBA's comments on what the deficiencies were, address those deficiencies, and then apply that new standard to the city's application. And when in the city's application, there was a very robust set of information and mitigations provided by the city to offer up its best approach for meeting a natural resources standard. So it may be that what we've already offered would be sufficient after the definition has been restructured, or there may be a request by the county for additional mitigations that the city could then consider and offer as a part of its land use application. So that would be what's going to happen over the next 4 months or so. Once that decision is issued, presumably if the county then reissues the permit, we, the city, would be able to begin work again on the project, and opponents would be able to choose to appeal that one narrow piece that's just been redefined on the natural resources, but none of the other issues that were previously brought up. There was the question of cost. There will be cost. We're not able to define that specifically now. The cost will mostly be in terms of just the deferrals and expenses of having contractors, on hand that we can't actually employ towards advancing the schedule. So there will be cost, and we will continue to work to define those. There is in the overall budget some level of contingency that's built into the budget. Whether or not the contingency will be sufficient to address what's going to come up with the delays is yet to be determined. So we will be able to update the board over time as we get further resolution. A lot of this will depend on how the county approaches and conducts the remand process and the timelines that are associated there. And so as we learn more about that, we'll be able to filter that back to understanding how that affects our actual construction. So that's all, of course, very fresh, and we're working very closely with the county to resolve. So hopefully that provides some level of information. And again, I will follow up with some documentation that helps people have access to this going forward.
Thank you so much, Edward. Board members, follow-up questions that still remain. Mally, Kyle, based on some of the questions you had about the cost of the cost of the delay, I guess, is maybe one way of looking at it.
I thank you for that information, Edward. That was really helpful. I don't have any concerns at the moment. I'm curious to see how the budget will reflect that in upcoming meetings. So thank you.
I do have a follow-up question, and it's building off of a question I asked 2 weeks ago. So it's partly directed at Cecilia and also to Eddie. The larger question is, do you, with all of the machinations occurring at the federal level, what funding are we expecting from the EPA? And is any of that funding applied to this Bull Run facility? And I just generally like clarity around EPA to understand timing and amount, and if this dismantling continues at the federal level of our agencies, how that will affect the city of Portland.
It's a great, very relevant question. In terms of funding, I think you're all aware we have those major WIFIA loans that are allocated through EPA. Unrelated to what's going on at the federal level, while we are in this remand, it's uncertain whether or not we'll continue to have access to the WIFIA funding. And to be clear, the WIFIA funding is not our sole funding source. So it's not that the situation that if there's a decision that we can't use WIFIA funding during the remand, it doesn't necessarily mean that we won't have available funding. So I want to make that really clear. But we are working to resolve that. And so we will have updates at some point in presumably the near future on whether or not there's going to be continued access to WIFIA funding during the remand. Clearly, during remand, our expenses go way down. We're not moving forward with the project in the same way. There's got to be some maintenance activities on site during the period of time in which we're in quote unquote shutdown. But we won't certainly be, having the same level of spending going on during that window of time. The longer term issues that you're pointing out, it's a mixed bag. I guess I don't really know what to say, and there hasn't been any direct impact yet that we know of relative to the stuff that's happened at the federal level. Our direct regulator, I'll remind everybody, is the Oregon Health Authority. So we're in active communications with them about everything that's going on with the LUBA land use decision and about continuing to keep them up to date relative to what the project schedule will be, impacted by and what it will look like once we get greater certainty. And certainly they have a role directly interfacing with EPA, and they may provide us additional information about impacts to EPA going forward.
I have two other
Okay.
questions. I don't want to dominate this call though. Do other board
Yeah,
members have questions?
Yeah, let's pause a minute, Kyle. Thank you for that offer. And just look to Robin and Chris and Lauren.
I need to step
is
off
it-
camera for just a minute. Sorry to interrupt. I will be back
Okay.
in just maybe 2 minutes.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Edward. Yeah, other board members on any of the topics that we've been talking about, transitions, retirements, federal disruption, and filtration plant land use decisions, anything that you want to ask or state before we get a little bit more? Yeah, Chris, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question probably for Cecilia. One of the things that we had in an all-staff meeting today was this BES is deferring roughly $20 million worth of CIP projects out to save $1 million. Is water doing something similar? And if that is the case, what are the costs? Because I'm assuming we're deferring maintenance further out in BES. Is water doing the same?
Sure. This is Cecilia Hoon, Portland Water Bureau Finance Director. For what we're doing with the budget, we did not propose any changes to the capital program. And that's largely because as we saw the increase to the filtration project over the last year, we have been doing that. We have been adjusting our capital program, and felt that, we got it basically to the minimum of wanting to at least ensure that we're maintaining our system, doing the ongoing maintenance of our system. So there wasn't a lot of opportunities there to be looking for as far as reductions or modifying to be able to get to the savings that we need.
thanks for that question and response. Richard and Cecilia, Chris and Cecilia. Robin, Lauren, did you have anything you wanted to get out on the table at this point, or?
Nothing in particular. I mean, there's a lot going on, so definitely appreciate getting all the information. I appreciate it.
Sure. All right, so.
All right, I will take the floor again then. Kyle Chipman, voting member of Pub. I have two questions. First is, and I'm not sure if anyone on the call is equipped to answer this, but in reviewing the One Water report that was issued October 8th of last year, one of the big pieces that jumped out on the second recommendation and immediate next step was to prepare an employee readiness survey. And especially in this moment of transition, did that take action from October? Is that on anyone's radar? Has a survey been prepared? And just what's the state of that specific line item?
I will answer.
Yeah,
I'm not aware of any follow-up
Okay.
on that at all.
It felt like a great source of insight into the ground level people who are doing the work, especially with all this transition and just, for lack of a better word, upheaval. My next question applies to Quisha. Is it pronounced Quisha? I'm sorry. How do you pronounce your name? Ms. Light?
Good morning. Yes, I'm Quisha Light. I'm
Quisha.
Customer Service Director. Yes, Quisha.
Thank you so much. I even for me, like meeting new employees in our team, always names, like get the names right out the
I
gate.
appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Quisha. So it's a question for Eddie, for Quisha, even for Chris in his own transition. What plans or steps are in place to transfer institutional knowledge as you transition out from roles and have new team members enter roles?
I can go first since in my bureau, I have a counterpart who does most of everything that I do whenever I step out. So it will be fairly easy whenever I transition out. We have a new supervisor. She is online, and I am training her with the things that I do that are unique. So it shouldn't be a big transition for my accounting type stuff. And as for the pub portion, our president of the union has been made aware. He was told a couple weeks ago because it's been in the works for a while. And he's looking into who would be an appropriate person to bring the union interest as well as what is helpful for the pub. The main reason why I was selected is because obviously I have an accounting background. So we felt that it would be helpful for all of you to have a union perspective as well as a numbers person on here. I'm not sure if that's going to be the similar focus, but that's why I was picked years ago from Rob. He may come back himself, since obviously he was before, and he's very aware of what's going on in the ES and water, but he hasn't told me his plans yet.
I guess relative to the transition in water, I won't pretend to say that we are as prepared as we would like. When we lost our director last July, there was clarity in terms of my role as the deputy to step in and to pick up the leadership for the organization, and we haven't had the opportunity to move forward with reinstituting that level of succession structure in our executive leadership. But what I will say is that we in water have spent much of the last 2 to 3 years really focused on building out a leadership team that really was functioning collectively as an executive leadership team and really sharing that administrative and executive load among our organization. And in making the recommendation, I made the recommendation to DCA Donna Paul supporting Quisha stepping into this role. It was really based on my understanding and confidence in her skill set to be the right leader for this moment for the organization. She hasn't been with the organization. I was with the organization for many, many years before coming into this role. Quisha has not, but what the differences in our skill sets and roles is that she comes with a really strong management background and formal training and structure, as well as really relevant utility experience within the private utility sphere here locally. And I really feel like the organization is going to be so well served. And in terms of the transfer, I'm spending a lot of time with Quisha over the next 3 weeks. We're spending large chunks of time really actively discussing, from my perspective, what the relevant pieces of information to transfer are. And then, you know, I shouldn't say this too loudly, but I'm also not going far. I'm close by and available for Quisha or any member of our leadership team. If there's information that I can be useful for, I will not hesitate to support this organization and the mission of the city. So that's what I can say relative to transition.
Thank you, Eddie. That's even in our, when we transition internally for our team as well, similar. It's prepare as best you can to document and shadow and work actively in the moment, and then prepare kind of a soft rolling transition out and just be available for reference and questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Edward and Quisha and Chris for helping us understand. Yeah, just understanding what, maybe not understand isn't the right term anyway. Having some context around what you all are working through and how you're preparing as well. All right, I would suggest, so let me do a little bit of a recap, if I may, of the last half hour or so. So I am hearing that there is still a desire and I'm sorry, Quisha, you came on camera. Did I cut off and move on before you were? Okay. No, and please,
No,
please come on.
sorry, just clicking and clicked it by mistake. Go for it.
No. It would be wonderful to see you. I just sometimes take that as a like, hey, I'm ready to say something. So I have heard that there is still an interest and a desire among we voting board members to share our thoughts and concerns about the upcoming, right? The budgeting that's taking place to guide the city through the next fiscal year. And I've heard some pretty specific comments and concerns expressed, and I will say, just speaking for myself as a voting member, I share many of the concerns that Mally and Kyle, you have already articulated. And I am also hearing, yes, while there is pretty intense uncertainty and in many structural ways, political ways, financial ways over the next several months, that at the end of the day, the city council will adopt, hear comments on, perhaps modify and adopt and approve a budget. So there are opportunities and decision makers that we need to make sure are aware of PUB's concerns on budgeting regarding the two utilities that we have an interest in. So I am going to suggest with that we do move our discussion to actually maybe starting to get some things down on so-called paper. Again, we don't have to finalize it today, but I would like to make sure that we have captured, obviously there's a recording of the meeting, but I'd like to start capturing some of these specific comments on the budget. So what do people think about moving on to that for the next 15 or 20 minutes? Hearing no objections anyway.
Yeah, 1000%. I'm down. And I think I would like to approach it from a timeline perspective first. So we can also think about the time we have available to try to hit major meetings, major points of delivery, and then fit within all of our capacities, what we can define. Can I make one
Sure.
more statement before we transition this conversation to that budget-centric?
Certainly.
Thank you. Kyle Chipman, voting member. So part of the questions about the nature of the director transitions and the One Water initiative as having a single head and the pure structure of the two bureaus is, the clarity of raising budget concerns almost seems superseded by the non-clarity of what the structure of these organizations is. And I still think it's valuable for us to do it because we, like Amy was saying at the start, we show up in this moment as a structure is defined. I say all that because I also want to recognize, and in preparing for today's call and then looking into some of the media reporting, I was also looking at internet comments, which is a murky domain, but it is a reflection of sentiment, unless it's bots or whatever. There is this undercurrent of emotional reasoning and villainization of bureaucracy, of good technical people who we've experienced on these calls, people working in good faith for civil service who are being demonized, and it's emotional. And I feel like an aspect of the effort that we can offer as representatives of the public is also to attempt to communicate the good work, the good faith work that's being done by these technical people. So it's not just everyone's a fraudster, everyone's just taking my tax money and I want it back. And then in the end, we lose these major pieces of infrastructure. It just falls apart. So that's just something I felt at the national level, and I see it seep into even local commentary through, the anonymity of the internet. I don't know if I'm not trying to also overextend our capacity as a board, but I just want to make that point clear too. I also, I sent to Amy and Jonah, I've appreciated some of the YouTube videos and more kind of public facing releases from the Water Bureau that they push out. These are the people doing the work. It's a great effort, but I just want to make that point known as well before we start thinking about how we can form breakout teams and form strategy around our activation as a board.
Yeah, for sure. We can't operate in a vacuum or everything's connected. And I really appreciate, Kyle, the use of the word emotional, and recognizing that that everything is at the end of the day, decisions, even so-called objective decisions, are certainly informed by emotional responses, and we being aware of those and aware that that's out there is super important. So I appreciate you calling that out. Lauren, what are you thinking?
Yeah, thanks. Lauren Rosencrans, voting member. Definitely like 1000% echoing what Kyle said, and kind of aligned with what I was already going to mention / ask is, we can advise as our role as the pub to the leadership in this group, and that's our role, right? And we kind of talked about this last time, but it seems like we're often very aligned with like what we as representatives and as the pub members, with bureau leadership whom we discuss with in these meetings. So my kind of question to them is, and we talked about this a little bit in the leadership meeting, so I was hoping we could maybe extend that a bit pub wide, of like, who can we communicate, which is, on the screen, how to communicate as we're starting to put things down on paper, who are our contacts, who should we be, as Kyle said, like lifting up the good work of the people that we work with and also submitting our concerns to. And I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I believe Eddie mentioned a few options during the leadership meeting. Or maybe Amy.
Yeah, I can pull up. So the I think I heard mention two things. One is timeline concerns that are wanting to just kind of identify clear time points that we have, as well as points of contact. And so along those lines, I had planned to pull up the original document that was the initial brainstorm, and I can pull that up at any point too, but I wanted to flag, and there's a little bit more detail, but it's hard to share on screen in the document that Kyle had created with a time flow of where pub meetings fall within these timelines. But up here are just the most immediate key dates that we know are at least currently adopted by council as the dates that things are happening. So we know that we'll have the actual published documents with a bit more narrative detail and some of that equity information and program impact information in the draft budget that will be released at the end of this month. Then we have our 2 March meetings and 2 April meetings in between all of these other things happening. So we don't have firm dates yet for district listening sessions, but those will be by district area of the city, as well as city council work sessions on the draft budget, which I presume will be within the finance committee, but I imagine there will be budget specific conversations happening within a number of the committees as well as the full council. So as we know those dates, we will bring them up and see where they fall. But I would say between this meeting and the early and mid-March, hopefully you'll have kind of really pinned down what it is that you're trying to communicate, so that whether there is opportunity in public sessions with any of those committees or just more direct outreach to individual council members, that is the timeline that I think that would need to be happening. The mayor's proposed budget notice, so not the actual documents, but that's usually where like the decisions are put out, kind of the short list of here's the things that the mayor is moving forward, is April 21st, and then the actual document is available to the public in May. And in between those two things is the utility rate review. So that's where the rate decision is kind of finalized and made before council. So in my mind, between now and the mayor's notice and that rate hearing, if there's intent to impact current year decisions, or at least to communicate priorities to people, whether it's in this budget, this specific budget, or in whatever is coming next in the development of One Water or other guidance or direction that is being given, that's part of the immediate time frame. Who is it that you're wanting to advocate to? The leadership is made up of, several levels. So there's the city administrator and the deputy city administrator. So it's that group, which DCA Donna Paul is over utilities. So that's kind of at that level, is communication to the administrator and through the DCAs. The mayor, again, flagging that April 21st, because that's where the mayor will be putting out their formal decisions. The Council Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. So you've seen some of the notes that came out, the discussion that took place there, some of the areas of focus of some of those commissioners or council members, and what they're particularly looking at. So if you saw it, or if you saw the summary notes that Jonna Lynn put out, there's some valuable content there. There's a lot of focus, of course, on transportation because of the size and scale of the issues that they have going on as well. But there's also a lot of interest and perspective related to utilities as well. And then, of course, the Finance Committee. And so I've just listed out those. There are other committees like the Climate and Resilience and of course, the full council. So there are more members to reach out to. At least the initial feedback that I've heard from folks, from some of the pub members, is at least an interest in communicating to all of these groups. and to the full council, the mayor and administration with some of your priorities. But then the question is, what is some of the more direct outreach to individual council members as well? So that's what I have as far as kind of that foundational information. And then I'm checking time. So we have about 30 minutes left. I sent out a document with kind of the initial thoughts that were either pulling from prior documents, pulling from things that you said at the last meeting, and or additional feedback that we've received directly from some of the members. And so the version that I have to pull up on screen is already a little bit different, and it highlights the changes from the feedback that I had received so far, but of course would continue to evolve, and maybe there's fewer priorities that you want to focus on as far as your communication points. So I can pull up that document, or we can start fresh and just, take notes based on what you're talking about today. It's really the will of the group is what I want to go along with.
And Amy, can I ask about the work sessions? They didn't, I don't know that they had a particular date associated with them. But are those, city council work sessions on draft budget, so sometime in March and April, are those, let's see, I guess two questions. Would Pub have to be invited to even attend those work sessions? Is there an opportunity for Pub to provide some input or some comments, perhaps not formal testimony, or is that off limits at work sessions?
So typically work sessions, the folks who give verbal testimony or presentation are invited, so would need to be requested. If those work sessions are actually taking place at a committee meeting, there is a way to, at any council meeting or committee meeting to sign up to give some public comment. There also is opportunity to provide comments in writing, to committee members or council members prior to when that's happening. So I'm not sure. That's certainly something that I imagine a request could be made to whoever the key point people are, probably through city administrator, maybe budget director, if Pub is interested in being able to have a voice. I also, because I don't know what those work sessions, how they're going to be structured, whether I assume there's going to be some breakdown of service area discussions. And so I don't know if that how that's going to play out in the schedule. As soon as we know, I will let you know. I do know that those regular committees that just formed, they just started having their first meetings a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I can't remember. So I know that the infrastructure committee meets on the second and fourth Mondays, as does the finance committee. And the agendas for those are put out the Thursday prior to that. So John Lynn and I are watching those schedules and any dialogue about that so that we can get word out to members about what's coming on any of those agendas for all of the committees, but particularly those, since those are the ones that seem the most relevant to this conversation. And we'll also connect with DCA Donapal to find out through the city administrator's office whether there is opportunity to advocate for Pub's engagement at the right work session or conversations, as they have in the past had a more formal role in some of those work sessions, at least having a couple minutes to provide some public feedback on the budget proposals.
Okay, thanks. yeah, I have in the past found the few work sessions that we were either invited to or took part in, they seemed more, I don't know, an opportunity for a bit more kind of engagement, less formal, and you can, really have a conversation and ask questions back and forth. And it seemed like that might be something to explore for, for us, especially, newer members who haven't had that opportunity. That might be a really neat way to, anyway, get folks kind of at the front of the line, even if it is just for 2 minutes to share our thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's in the later announcements, but I did want to flag too that the city has hired the engagement officer position, which I assume, a lot of things related to advisory boards and other engagement stuff. We've kind of been waiting for that role to be filled to get some additional information about priorities and also advocate for where advisory boards fit in all of this decision-making process. So there is somebody in that role. They're brand new. I do have, we as staff have a meeting just as an introduction to talk about some of, pub's current issues, recruitment and having a voice in decision-making, all that kind of stuff. So I'll report back to you all what I learned through that avenue as well, because that again is another opportunity I see as just being able to understand how that work may move forward citywide and how pub can engage if there's any space to engage in helping define some of what improvements you'd like to see, since we've had those discussions over the past year and more.
Thank you. All right, well, this may be the time to pull up, Amy, the document that you were starting to compile some of people's thoughts. Hang on, Kyle, let's give Amy a chance to get. And but before we come right back to you, Kyle, but again, for the benefit of newer members, Amy, could you, let's see, well, maybe, okay, I don't need to ask Amy to do this, just I'll provide a little bit of description of how we have worked through and compiled our thoughts and our comments in the past. Doesn't mean we have to do it that way this time or ever again. But yeah, I found it, as a voting member, I have found it to be pretty effective of getting a lot of good thoughts and a lot of perspectives, eyes and different perspectives on something. And I have found it to be a good collaborative process. But and guided by Amy's amazing organization. Amy has traditionally listened and taken notes and listened to the recording and just taken the spoken word of folks' concerns, ideas on whatever the topic was, budget, other things we've testified on. And then we have sort of worked through visually, right? Seeing what has been captured on again, quote unquote, paper, had discussions back and forth about, is that a fair and accurate reflection of what your concern is? And really talk back and forth and ask each other questions. And I don't think we're at this stage now, but after maybe a couple sessions where we sort of put our heads together and our thoughts together on what our budget concerns are, then we may have a couple volunteers that not a couple, and this would mean, it doesn't have to be a public meeting when those two folks get together with Amy and Jonalyn, but a couple folks to go through and, kind of, it's more than tidying it up, but kind of compile, format, maybe simplify, just try and make it into a nice sort of one voice, right? Sort of coherent, flowing document. And then that comes back to the full board for further refinement, comment, and eventually, we take a formal vote and say, yes, this reflects the thoughts and the concerns and the recommendations of the pub, and that becomes a formal document that gets submitted, either read formally as testimony, submitted as written testimony, submitted for the record as as a document and deliverable that came out of the pub. So like I said, we don't have to do that this time, but I just wanted to let folks know that that's how in the last several years the pub has sort of produced its decisions and recommendations for the record. So
yeah, and the one thing I would add to that, Karen, is that this first version, so sometimes depending on the speed with which we need to move, as well as the detail of conversation that has taken place, we may start with an actual written document. What I've tried to do here with Jonalyn is kind of identify just in more bulleted form the key areas. So you'll see some of them start to get a little bit longer, maybe because I got feedback from a member, or I've pulled specific language from when it was discussed in a meeting or from a prior letter. But each of these concepts would evolve into something with more poeticism that comes from your language or from discussions, and turns into something that flows. And it kind of depended on what the purpose of this would be, because it could serve as some, guiding talking points if individuals are having direct conversations with council members, to know, like, okay, here's some of the key areas that we hoped people would cover, so that that if you're speaking as a representative of pub based on things that you've all kind of agreed to, versus actually getting into a more detailed written document or talking points for an actual verbal testimony. So it can evolve into all and any of those three things based on how you want to proceed with the kind of next steps. So the initial goal was to try to identify all those potential areas so that you can either reach agreement on, yes, some of those that captures the key areas, and then I'd like to give feedback on these few points so that I know to follow up with individual people, or to identify, I don't think, given the context of what we're dealing with in this current environment, that we should spend time on that particular topic. Yes, let's save that as like for the future, it's important, but maybe not where we focus our time right now. So be thinking of it with that lens and identify any that stand out to you that you want to make sure stay as part of this. I can take notes on screen. You can see in some places where I'm not sure what it is that you want to advocate for, there may be question marks. I want this to be the voice that you all agree to. Where there has been some specific feedback received, I've tried to integrate into this document based on some folks who had reached out with either some follow-up or things that they wanted to make sure were a part of it. So I've tried to integrate some of those concepts where you can see highlighted in red. So when we get to those, that's what the new language is about, is my attempt to try to capture some of what I've heard outside of meetings as well.
Yeah, I like how you've at the very beginning, Amy, just highlighting the different ways that we can use this information. It is not just like one letter. I mean, it could be, but calling out different pieces at different times as it's appropriate, verbal testimony, work sessions, et cetera. But this could be kind of our, you know, I don't know, just, you know, the big document where we've sort of put down everything. And then we can, you know, pick out pieces that are most relevant for the particular communication and form of communication that we're conveying it. So, and can you walk us through, Amy, but before we go to Kyle, can you walk us through your thinking around key elements to potentially include? Is that, yeah, can you kind of walk us through how you came to separate those out?
Yeah, and again, they may not be in the separations, even as we're creating this document. You know, it's like I start talking about something later that we already talked about above, and so it's like, okay, is that the right place? But you know, so the flow of it may look different when it's in a written letter, but this was an attempt to, as we were listening to meetings or looking at documents, kind of pull out those key topics. So you know, it is an important time, I think, to reintroduce PUB to new council members and what the history and purpose is for PUB as an informed public feedback opportunity. And I think we've heard, I don't think Lorraine is here today, but, you know, some reminders about there's legal context that led to why this is important, and that, you know, that you exist to kind of seek a balance of all those issues. So that's obviously kind of a broad topic, a lot within that first bullet. So, you know, as you've been highlighting and repeatedly for many years, you know, engagement early and impactful engagement being important, potentially, even if guidance is not going to result in change in these decisions, kind of setting some groundwork for engaging PUB in perhaps even setting guidance in the future. And then the next sections kind of get into some of the more details of things that have been raised in meetings, specific current concerns about the rate guidance. And so even the requested budget or the draft budget that they'll be seeing is based on guidance that is concerning to the PUB because of the impacts on infrastructure and services. And so not focusing on specific decisions that have been put forward so that those are then replaced with different decisions, but instead to focus on kind of the fundamental guidance and whether that should move forward the way that it is proposed. And so try to get into some of the details of that. Not sure whether to keep going or to jump to Lauren's question. Lauren, did you have a question about one of these first pieces before I move on, or?
Just kind of a quick question. I appreciate this idea of introduction of the PUB to those council members. And I wonder if that's something maybe, sorry, I'm trying to read through and ask my question at the same time, but maybe that's something that we kind of is that something we can kind of pose to them as a question, as like, where, you know, here's where our purpose, here's what we've done historically, here's why we are relevant, etc. But also, can we, you know, offer that up as maybe an ongoing question of how can we valuably engage with the new structure, right? And I imagine that's an ongoing conversation because, you know, as we've heard multiple times, it's, you know, still figuring things out a lot. I think maybe Dawn said building the plane while we're flying it, you know, so I would imagine, but maybe that's something that we can mention, is that we're interested in collaborating on what that engagement looks like. Thanks.
Great. So, trying to think because these are some of these are changes since you've seen it. So I flagged a bit more deeply some of the increases to general fund overhead based on some of the feedback that I had heard, and the not being able to let rates adjust based on increased costs that have been incorporated by other council decisions. So that is a new piece that I integrated since the last version of this you saw. So of course, affordability being kind of a fundamental and maybe something you start with, so more towards the top and then come back to later on, because that has been equity and affordability have been at the core of a lot of your conversations and prioritization and kind of where your focus is. So there's some elements related to that. And then, of course, a lot related to infrastructure investment. Some of those, the decision that Chris mentioned earlier about the 1.3 million savings now that really will cost more later. And so some of those decisions not being grounded in true cost savings for ratepayers. So there's some elements of that. Some of the stuff at the top is looking back at some of the questions that you asked about best practices for asset maintenance. What should it look like? And the reality of, what the city currently is doing, even if they were implementing their financial plan. So taking it even deeper than what was planned, obviously has an impact on that as well. There's probably more to be added around intergenerational equity, but in this section, I was focusing on the infrastructure, deferred maintenance, and growing that backlog. And then also some concern about some of what decisions have been made in the past and that you're hearing now from current council members around potential limits to SDCs or concern about adequate development and the reality of some of those decisions then shifting those expenses onto ratepayers and the impact that that has. And that if exceptions are made, that it should be with a focus on equity based on some of what you've said in prior meetings. Tried to capture some of the conversations around equity at a very high level, and the importance of providing equitable service, financial assistance, again, coming back to the affordability. And then some of the stuff at the end is kind of stating the reality of opportunities that transition presents. And of course, this could be expanded significantly as the One Water stuff unfolds too, if there's efficiencies to be achieved eventually. But that the kind of focusing on what your priorities are even within this present time and during transition. And then it did have the suggestion to make sure that we're having some clear actions and recommendations in kind of the final outcome. So not just broad ideas, but some specific asks of whoever it is that this is being communicated with, whether it's requesting direct meetings, their participation or attendance in a future pub meeting, some engagement around the new One Water director recruitment, as I've had questions from a number of people about that, as you have been involved in prior recruitment efforts and priority setting for what is being looked for in a director, as well as for natural resources and One Water efforts. So that is the current document based on what we've pulled from what we've looked at in the past couple of weeks. And there could be something very important that we've just overlooked because it was at a prior meeting or hasn't been stated in a way that it made its way into this document. So open the floor to everybody to I know we don't have very much time left, so there may just be one section we want to focus on. And then I guess my ask would be to, if people like this approach, to spend some time really looking at some of these bullets and either coming up with some changes or additions, removals, what you want to emphasize as a priority, making sure that, you know, there's clear agreement on kind of the top 3 priorities, or where there's one of these topics that, you know, you have specific language about. I always welcome specific language from members directly, because often the documents that we create, we try to pull from the things that you say because you're more experts in this area. And so the wisdom that comes out in your language can be incredibly valuable. So if there's an area that is of your expertise or particular interest, or a point that you really want to make come across, then share with me your specific language, and we'll also bookmark that and save it in a place so that we can integrate that into the final pieces of what's provided.
So yeah, let me turn to the members and just recognizing the 8 minutes we have left in our meeting. I would suggest that we may want to discuss for the next couple minutes just what do you think about this approach and what do you want next steps to be. Might be the most realistic use of the next couple of minutes. And then I want to save 5 minutes at the end because Amy has announcements, and I'm assuming we have not heard from DCA Donna Paul, so we're not expecting her to call in.
No, I
Okay.
have not. So
Okay.
I assume that the technical issues made it not possible. So I would expect to, she made herself available for the next meeting. So we'll
Okay.
try to coordinate with the chairs around the timing of that.
Perfect. Kyle, please go ahead.
Is the vision for what we produce a document that is submitted to council? Is that's the vision?
I think that's one vision, Kyle. I mean, we could use the thoughts and the elements of this. This happens to be a document. If we wanted to submit written testimony to, I don't know, let's just say the infrastructure committee, you know, we might pull certain pieces of this. You know, traditionally we have had 2 formal letters that go to the you know, back when there were commissioners that were in charge of the bureaus. We would submit an initial budget letter. Here are pub's values. Here are some of what we're seeing in the budget that we have concerns about so far. And then later in the spring, we would have our sort of official formal statement on you know, what our opinion was of the rate increase and certain spending areas that we had concerns about, or you know, where we wanted to see more investment in financial assistance, that sort of thing. So we did have 2 formal, official, written submittals. And again, this year is going to look a little different because I think it's a little bit more freeform. I think we actually have more opportunities to present to different audiences now.
And I would say, Kyle, I would say my first goal or hope as staff for you all is to get some agreement around concepts, not the final written version yet, because I don't know what could happen next week that, you know, may, or 3 weeks from now, before you've reached a final written version of a document. And so it can be very helpful to have something else to pull from that we can either have the chairs then step in as a voice for pub, or even individual members saying, we haven't had an opportunity to meet, but here's some of the key priorities that were identified by the pub. So I think getting those priorities and concepts down and then allowing a little bit of time for whether working with volunteers or just directly as staff with chairs, then being able to turn that into something with a little bit more narrative is something that can happen as the weeks go on.
In the interest of time, we only have 4 minutes, and even leaving 2 minutes for announcements. Can I see a quick show of hands from people raising hands on the board for those who are able to access the links that I prepared that were included in Jonah's read ahead release? Do people see what was kind of the approach? Awesome, Alexis, cool.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kyle, I didn't have a chance to.
It's all good. I think I just, oh, go ahead, please.
I took a look at them. I think I would just need like a quick rundown of how that platform works.
Totally.
But otherwise, I appreciated the visuals aspect.
Yeah. In the minute before handing off to announcements, I think what's clear is it's not just I think differently, I just work differently. And a lot of it's about creating a real-time point of reference for coordination. A challenge in managing a static document is that we are kind of locked into 2-week cycle meetings or providing feedback to Amy, as opposed to giving us more flexibility to coordinate outside. I also, I think that the content itself, strong and representative of our conversations. And I appreciate deep and sincere appreciation for the synthesis that has been and the effort put in to kind of distill the points we've raised in what we can actually propose to council. My concern, or rather a drawback of submitting a document, is that it feels very easy to just kind of pass through and disregard. One shot that I was thinking of is, and in trying to identify council members per district and the committees on which they sit, if there's a way to correlate the impact of deferred hires or deferred capital improvement projects to direct constituency, not only to communicate to council, but also to actually communicate to just our citizens. Like, hey, if we're not spending money on this, these are the accruing risks that build up over time as it relates to your neighborhood. So that feels like the way that I also think is more about producing frameworks that sustain over time than producing static snapshots that kind of live and then become outdated. Yeah, that's probably beyond the purview of what we can actually accomplish, but it's the way that I think. So if anybody, after the meeting, if you want to jump on those links and I open the board actually up to be editable by anyone. I know that there's constraints around public access and visibility of how we can actually coordinate, but it's a real-time reference so that we can form small breakout teams. That's a lot of value there, I think.
Yeah, I hear that, Kyle, and that's really super important that we all, all of us board members need to be able to provide, to, take in information, to process information, and to provide, feedback and reflections in ways that are most, I don't know, just as you said, we all think differently, and we don't want to force ourselves to use just one method of showing what we're concerned about. So I really want to take that to heart and think about that for how we do what we are kind of entrusted to do, I guess.
It feels like the
representatives.
mental shift, the pivot to even shift thinking of how we deliver is its own effort. And I don't even think we have the time to do that. I think a document that is issued and provides alignment around our communication probably makes most sense within the time and our shared capacity. But I just want to share, if you can dig into the resources, I'm happy to jump on one-on-one calls with folks and just share the way I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, no, I hear that. Thank you. All right. Well, let's continue that thinking and conversation. And in between and at our next meeting, and turn it over to Amy for announcements, which have sort of already been announced, but anything else you need us to know, Amy, before?
Yeah, I think probably most of it we ended up covering. So we had conversation about the leadership stuff, and again, hopefully we'll connect with the DCA Donna Paul and continue that forward. A reminder that recruitment planning usually has started by now, and so that will be another important piece that we'll be looking for volunteers. I'll send out some more information once I get some more guidance internally from engagement officer as well as from the DCA around next steps. And then just the final piece I just wanted to note, obviously, and you probably saw in press that tentative agreements were reached by both of the unions that were potentially on strike at the or going to go on strike right after the last meeting. And so those are all in process and continuing to move forward. So we will just connect electronically about planning for the next meetings. So I think that is everything, because all the agenda stuff is to be determined based on the updates that we're able to coordinate at the upcoming meetings, as well as continuing this budget conversation. So we'll send more information out to you all via email with reminders. So reach out to me in whatever format is easiest for sharing any information between now and then. I think that's it.
I have one more question for Amy, and I forget if you answered this at our last meeting. In terms of etiquette for messaging across board members, is the group email only accessible to issued communication from yourself and Jonah, or can we communicate with each other through email?
You can communicate directly one-on-one with board members, so you can access that, but not full board conversations. So that's why we often do blind copies. And so if there is communication you want to go to the full board, then we will send that out. You know, often coordinating with chairs. Typically, if it's something coming from a board member, we just share it with everybody. But we do have to be conscious of public deliberation happening outside of the public space.
Yeah.
So that is the important piece. And, you know, we don't have, you know, enough movement forward around electronic deliberations and how that work. So I expect to be having conversations about that again in the coming year with the new engagement officer and some of the legislative stuff that continues to come up periodically. But yeah, for right now, we do control that somewhat just to prevent those risks.
For sure, for sure. We have a directory as well, already defined, with like a table with name and contact.
Yeah, we have the directory that we've shared. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess for the people on the call, if anybody wants to hit me up, just reach out directly, and I can share my email on this call, or you know, whatever. You can send my email out. Let me know if you want to chat. Happy to. Take time.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll resend out those links